This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by the one, the only, Cam Lau. Today is June 9th, 2025, and it's National Strawberry Rhubarb Pie Day. The former poet laureate of the United States, Randall Jarrell, once said, "The people who live in a golden age usually go around complaining about how yellow everything looks." Before I bless you with all of my political insights, I'm going to have to ask you to pay for it. This podcast is presented weekly, free to you, and all I ask is one small favor. I would like you to give me a 5-star rating wherever you listen, whether it be Apple, Spotify, Audible, Podbean, wherever it is. Give us 5 stars so people can find us. Also, please follow us on Instagram at the Conservative American Message on Instagram and Facebook. My generation has been lied to a lot. Gen Z and even millennials, their entire lives have been faced by lies by the government, by schools, by even some of our parents. We get lied to about everything. And one of the most tragic and saddest lies when it pertains to the American dream is this idea that young people today will never be able to afford to buy a house. It's just impossible. All the houses cost $5 million, and we all make $7 an hour. That's the narrative that the left has pushed, and it's been pushed so far that it's even taken a very strong hold in conservative circles among young people. There are very few young people on the left or the right who truly understand the economics of why houses cost what they do and the cost of living and how things are actually probably one of the best states they've ever been in this country. The American dream is live and well, and anyone who doubts that or wants to be a dream crusher, as Dave Ramsey would call them, I have no time for that. I'm not going to let the dreams of my generation be crushed by a bunch of idiotic people who are convinced that because of some Facebook post that the cost of living has gotten out of hand and that young people can never get ahead. We are literally have such a huge opportunity right now. Wages have gone up so high since COVID. We are making crazy amounts of money if you compare it to even 5-6 years ago. It's insane, and our generation has been extremely lucky beneficiaries of that change. And to sit here now and whine about the housing prices, I mean, obviously inflation has become a huge problem. The Biden administration, they caused a lot of problems for our economy in the last 4 years, but those 4 years were not enough to completely destroy all that has been built on for decades of American exceptionalism. So I broke down some of these numbers to take a real, true, and honest look at can young people buy a house today compared to the previous generations that all bought their houses in the 80s and bought it for, a peanut and $5 bill, and now they want to sell it for $10 million, as is so claimed on all these memes around social media. So let's take a look at this. The median house price, the actual sold price in 2025 in the first quarter, was $431,250. It's a lot of money, talking almost $500,000. I certainly don't think I could afford a house for that much, but that's the median on a national scale in the first quarter of this year. The median income in the United States today, $80,610 a year. If we take that, in a 40-hour work week and divide it out, that comes to almost $40 an hour, about $38.75. Mortgage rates today, they've gone up significantly since COVID, at least. When you were looking at 2-3%, now we have a 7% interest rate. That's not a low rate, but it is nowhere near where we used to be in the past, as you'll see pretty shortly here. So, if we figure out the math on a $431,250 house, if you put the average, well, not the average, but if you put down like 20%, which is a standard, 30-year fixed loan, 20% down, that's a pretty standard mortgage. So if you did that, your monthly mortgage payment would be $2,295.29. So almost $2,300. So if you take that as a percentage of your monthly income, 34% of the median income today is spent on the median house payment. So, that's a significant chunk. That's more than I would like to pay. I think Dave Ramsey would say you want to stay under 25% of your net take home pay. We're figuring this off of gross pay. So yeah, that's a pretty high number, 34% of your income. It is probably one of the most important things out of your budget to worry about is your actual shelter, your house. And there's a lot of other costs that have gone up, groceries and things, and people are feeling the squeeze. I'm not doubting that. I understand there are people out there that are struggling, but to think that our generation has it so much worse than anybody else, that's just complete, arrogance that nobody even has done the math on. And that's why we're doing this today. So let's go back and look at these numbers from 1981, probably one of the worst economic years in, maybe not since the Depression. I guess I don't know, maybe it would be since the Great Depression. If you take 1981 when interest rates hit their peak after Jimmy Carter had just destroyed our economy before Reagan got in there and started turning things back around, 1981, the year Reagan took office, was probably one of the worst economic years in recent American history. So, and that's the worst year, but you have to remember people had to buy houses in that year. People had to feed their families, and they had to take out mortgages. And so I think it's fair to compare 1981 to 2025 because we're claiming that all these old people bought their houses in the 80s for nothing and now they want to sell them for everything. Well, let's look at what those people went through to get that house. Because the average house, or not the average, the median, as I gotta say, it's not the average because you have averages, big numbers, little numbers skew things. We take the median, the middle. If you know anything about statistics, you'll understand why. But the median house price in 1981 was $83,000. So that is 5 times less than what it is today. I mean, that's significant. 5-time increase in the cost of housing. If you go to the income bracket, 22,390. That is the median household income in 1981. So that's quite a bit less. It might not have increased as much as housing prices have increased. You're looking at maybe just over $10 an hour, about 3.5 times today when you figure 80,000 to about 22,000 for 2025 to 1981. So if we look at house prices have quintupled 5 times, and pay increase has gone 3.5 times what it was in 81. So you would sit there and think, well, obviously the housing prices have increased more than the pay, so something's not right here. We are obviously suffering more. But there's more numbers to consider because the price that a house is bought for and the median income that a family makes is not the only things that affect the squeeze that these families felt in the 80s. Because as I said, interest rates hit their peak in modern history in 1981 at 16.6% interest. That is more than double the interest rate today that everyone whines about being so high. And 7% is a higher number. I mean, I think we're actually at like maybe 6.5% today. But 7% is what we hit, here right at the end of the year and going into January, February maybe. Now we're starting to come down a little bit and things are getting even better. But at 16.6% interest, if you take that same monthly payment of what that mortgage is going to cost, that would be $18.65.83. So, that's the monthly income. So $18.65.83. That's what you're making a month on that 1981 income. The payment $925.11. A lot less than your payment today. Obviously, inflation, housing prices gone up 5 times. We've seen that, but that 16.6% brings it up quite a bit. And so if we take now the 1865.83 that I accidentally said earlier, you're making about $1,800 a month. Your mortgage payment is $900 a month. That's 50% of your income. So in 1981, if you take the median income, the median house price, and apply the interest rates of mortgage costs at the time, you're talking 50% of your income being spent on a mortgage payment for pretty much the average American, compared to 34% today. So who had it worse? These boomers that are sitting on these $1 million houses, or us today that have so much more disposable income? Not only is it a monthly payment basis, but if you take the whole course of a 30-year note, the total cost of the mortgage today, you're going to pay for that house just shy of 2 times. If you got a $400,000 house, you're going to spend just over $800,000 on that mortgage, paying the interest throughout the full 30-year note. In 1981, if you did the same thing, you would pay for the house 4 times. So who really had it worse? Because, if we're talking you're buying a house for cash, well, anyone who can buy a house for cash is going to make money on that deal. But when we're talking about the average American family and how they had to make these mortgage payments at insane interest rates that we can't even fathom today, and we want to whine about what they have invested in their house today that we're trying to buy, there's no comparison. Now, those are all the national median numbers that I got from, I guess the sources I should mention come from the Federal Reserve, census.gov, and then also I did take some numbers from Ramsey Solutions. But in every case, if there was conflicting numbers or, conflicting statistics of some sort, I always took the worst number for making my case because I wanted this to be rock solid. I mean, I took the highest income, the lowest house price, everything to make this come out to prove my point that we have it so much better today than our parents and grandparents in the 80s. Now, if you break this down like by region, state, city, there's obviously so much variance to it and house prices and income. But I just have a couple examples to show the difference between the lifestyle you want to live and what you have to pay for that. And it kind of also shows how different states and areas have run things. So obviously, I'm going to look at Iowa, being a very low cost of living state where I live, probably one of the best states in my opinion. We're the number 7 lowest cost of living in the country right now, and so the average house price is like half of the national. So you're looking at $220,000 to buy a house. I think, looking when I'm house shopping on Zillow and stuff, I think that totally tracks. I mean, you can still find stuff for 150 grand in more rural areas, and you can get a pretty nice place for like 250 to 300. $500,000 is pretty much a mansion in Iowa. There's obviously big cities like Des Moines and Iowa City where those costs go up significantly. But if you take the whole state, 220,000, half of what, so you're looking at way better. If the national average, we were paying 34% of our income, you take the state income average in Iowa of 73,000 some and 220,000 house price, that means that you're talking 19% of your income, 19% going to a mortgage payment. The national average being 34%, and in 1981 being 50%. So that's where you can see, if you want to sit here and whine sitting in New York City and Manhattan that you can't afford to live there, well, yeah, because that's like the highest cost of living place in the whole world. You're not, as a 20-year-old with no work experience, going to make enough money flipping burgers at McDonald's to afford a fancy high-rise in Manhattan. I mean, you would think people could understand that. But there's other places in this country, outside of even the highest of high cost of living, that are actually worse than in the 80s. But remember, the average is better. So if we look at California, the average house price there is actually double the national average in 2025. So you're looking at $829,000 to buy a house in California. The income, it's a little higher, but $95,500, not that much higher than the national average. $15,000 doesn't justify doubling the house price. So that means 55% of a Californian's income is on average going to their mortgage payment. But granted, they're the number 3 highest cost of living state in the country. So if you want to live in California, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, the LA, San Diego, these extremely high cost of living areas, yeah, that's going to be hard for you to do. But if you want to live in rural Iowa, you really don't have an excuse. Yet I listen to all these rural Iowans whine and complain to me on a daily basis about how hard it is to make ends meet, when really you just need to have a full-time job and not have so much debt. But we'll get to some of that also later. So, more middle of the road between Iowa and California. You look at Texas. It's a little bit lower than the national average, but pretty middle of the road as far as cost of living goes. So, $385,000 to buy a house in Texas, and average income of 75,000. That means that 32% of your income is going to your mortgage payment. So there again, a little bit, 2% lower than the national average, but still not bad. I mean, 32% of your income is very manageable, you would think, for one of your most important, not only costs, but also your most important investment in your life. Owning a home, that's part of the American dream. And that's why I'm so upset about this, because I just don't like people ragging on the American dream. Because without that, this whole America thing doesn't really work without that ethos of the American dream. So a couple more examples just to show you more, not just compare states, but even compare like urban to rural areas. If you look at New York City, just the actual New York City itself, the average house price, 875,000. I mean, you're pushing $1 million there. Average income actually significantly lower. I mean, just shy of the national median income. So you're talking 79,000. Well, that makes it really tough to do. There, you're talking 70% of your income going to a mortgage payment. That right there is a problem. That is not doable. 70% of your income going to a mortgage payment, how do you have enough to buy anything else? But that's why people are leaving the cities, because the reason those costs have gotten so high is because of different policies like rent control, where landlords have no choice but to continue to offer low rents to tenants that they can't even afford to make the payments on the properties they own, or pay insurance costs and property taxes because of rents being locked in at low rates just to protect these tenants. Well, now these tenants can also never buy a house. So how much do we really protect them? So if we compare New York City to the whole state of New York, the entire state itself, it's actually much more feasible compared to the city. And that's why these urban, Democrat controlled, stupid policy areas have made it too expensive to live there. They've done that by their own fault. So New York State, 577,000 to buy a house, and a median income of 81,600. That's 45% of your income going to a mortgage payment. There again, a little higher than the national average. Still beats 1981 though, for sure. I mean, 1981. If you want to look at California and New York, I mean, you might have places that are 80 to 90% of your income at times, and that is impossible to do. And that's why people did not live in those urban areas, fancy high dollar places that didn't have some type of generational wealth or extremely high incomes. They lived in the more rural areas, because even in California, you can probably find places that are a lot more similar to Texas, where you're looking at more like 30%, maybe 25% even of your income going to a monthly mortgage payment. But when you take the whole state with all of the cities and stuff, it's a lot higher at 55%. So that's a whole lot of numbers. I know that might be hard to dissect and understand just listening to me say a bunch of numbers over and over again, but it was really important for me to actually do the research on this, because I'm sitting here looking at this. I'm not going to tell you how much money I make, although I make decent money, especially for Iowa and my age and everything. But as a single income earner in my household, as a household of five, I make pretty decent money. And you take that number, and you take the housing costs where I live in rural Iowa. I mean, you're telling me as a 22-year-old, well, 23, I turned 23 yesterday, but you're telling me as a 23-year-old that it's impossible for millennials and impossible for Gen Z to buy a house? Um, I'm sitting here in the house that I just bought this last year, and I moved here from a house that I bought 2 years ago. I bought a house at like 20 years old. It's not impossible. In fact, it's very doable. And I make good money, but I don't make like insane money. I'm not some master's degree making six figures by any means, but I live within my means. I do not have any consumer debt. I follow Dave Ramsey very closely. And because of that, I've been able to set myself up in this way. Have I gotten, I wouldn't say luck, I'd say the providence of God, but have I had some fortunate things happen to me? Well, of course, and some people have unfortunate things happen to them that can set them back. But as a general rule, if you follow the biblical principles and the just common sense principles of how to manage your money, or just pay attention for like a fraction of your time at all to your money, you're probably going to have a lot more success like I did. This isn't me bragging about, how well I've done. That's not it at all. I'm not like some super uber rich person. I'm just trying to show young people that it's possible to live today. And in fact, it's much easier than our grandparents had it. The problem with our generation today, outside of their laziness and not willing to work and not willing to, do whatever it takes to improve their career and their situation, and in fact just demanding that their boss coddles them and bows down to them, which isn't a really good way to get a raise, But other than the laziness and entitlement problems that I see in this generation, we have a lot of different costs that just weren't there for our grandparents. In 1981, less than a quarter of Americans had cable TV. Today, maybe not very many people have cable TV anymore, but you certainly did before you had a streaming service. And so now we've got cable or a streaming service, or sometimes both. And a lot of times we have multiple streaming services, and we're spending hundreds of dollars a month on what used to be a couple $100 in cable. So this is costs that just weren't seen in the 80s. And then you pile on things that just didn't exist, like the internet. Well, I won't say the internet didn't exist. You people get so technical about this stuff, but every person in the United States did not have Wi-Fi in their home in 1981. We can agree on that. We didn't have cell phones that every single person had in their pocket and had a payment on their phone and paid outrageous fees to the provider and everything. So these increased costs have really eaten up a lot of that margin that's been gained by better interest rates and better home prices. Actually, if we look at actual inflation, home prices are not that out of line. But the biggest problem with today, and it isn't just Gen Z and millennials, because I think Gen Z especially gets a bad rap, and Gen Z is one of the best generations that is around right now. I will stand on that, and it isn't just because I'm part of it. I mean, the work ethic of many, not all, maybe not even a majority, but a very large chunk of Gen Z is out there working, doing whatever it takes, building wealth, and actually cares. Compared to millennials who are sitting here, they're getting well established into life, and they're still renting an apartment and whining about this very problem. But it doesn't just exclusively go to us younger generations. Even the Gen Xers, they whine and complain about this stuff all the time. And they are some of the biggest culprits of the consumer debt problem that has faced our country. Them and the millennials are far worse than Gen Z as far as consumer debt goes. The baby boomers and the generations before them weren't as bad, just because they didn't have access to some of the easy consumer debt we have today. But the consumer debt in 1981 compared to today on a household basis, I mean, you had about an average of like $10,000 in consumer debt in 1981. In 2025, the average household's consumer debt is over $150,000. That is a humongous number. I mean, you're looking at income percent of debt instead of debt percent of income. When you made $80,000 and you owed $10,000 on consumer debt, and now you owe, you made $20,000, you owed half of your annual income. Now you owe like 3 times your annual income in consumer debt. And I'm talking like bad consumer debt, vehicles, credit cards, not the mortgages, because the mortgage is a different type of debt. And that, if I compared that in there, then you would say that, well, the only reason that the debt is so much higher is because the house prices are so much higher. So this is just consumer debt, guys. That's how much, the monthly payments that people are paying in these debts is in the thousands of dollars a month. Those are things that didn't happen in the 1980s. So look, this is a debt problem. This is a luxury problem. Not only do we have the luxuries of Wi-Fi and cell phones and all kinds of other additional costs, we also have houses that are far better quality than houses in the 1980s. When you're buying a house for $80,000, it was an $80,000 house. And now we have every amenity in every house you could think of, and now we want to complain that we have to pay for it. Well, I'm just kind of sick of hearing about this, guys. I can't stand the entitlement of people young and old. And so hopefully you could decipher these numbers as I was rattling them all off and doing the math for you, that you can now understand that we actually have it far better than some have in the past, and we have nothing to complain about. I'm living proof of it. And once again, that's not to brag, that's to show you that you can do it. It is possible. So, how is it possible? Well, first of all, you got to get out of debt. I can't recommend Dave Ramsey enough to people. I get really annoying when you start talking about money with me because I just start rattling off all of the Dave-isms. But it's true. It's literally helped me in my life and helped millions of other people. And there's other people out there than just Dave Ramsey. If you're not into that, and if you're not into the whole biblical approach to money, well, good luck. Because if you don't have God on your side, I don't know how you expect to be successful with your money. But at whatever rate, there's knowledge out there. There's so many people talking about this from so many different angles as far as personal finance goes. And so it's so doable to buy a house in 2025. Even with house prices increasing and interest rates increasing, or at very high levels at least, I can't fathom why someone could not buy a house. If there are any of you that are out there that are so entitled to think that you have problems worse than everyone else, please reach out to me and message me, because I would love to chat and just set you straight, because once again, I'm sick of it. So that's all I have time for. Hope you were offended by this podcast. Have a great week and stay conservative.